The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. Lots to get to on today's program. Coming up later on in the program, we'll be talking about the love of God and how we ought to love not just God, but his family, God and his son, Jesus Christ, and, of course, all of the begotten sons of God in his church. So we'll look at that a little bit later in the program. Well, at thetrumpet.com right now, you have the featured article of the day, Hong Kong endures worst day of violence. This all coincided with the 70th anniversary of the communist state of China. China, of course, is imposing its will on little Hong Kong. We talked a week or two ago about the creeping authoritarianism of China and how that it was prophesied. That was on the radio a couple weeks back, and now, as I say, it's featured at the top of the Trumpet.com website. On Friday, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, a basketball team in Texas, he tweeted out, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." Simple tweet, just 7 words, but that set off quite a firestorm of reaction coming from the authoritarian state of China. And now you have this general manager, you have the NBA, you have NBA players backtracking as quickly as they can, hoping that this won't take away from, I guess, the lucrative market that is China. Quite a few NBA fans in China, and it's of course, it's interesting, too, that it comes from the Houston Rockets general manager, because one of the most popular Chinese players ever played for the Houston Rockets a number of years ago. So here the GM makes this tweet on Friday, and here is CNN International just explaining, again, this firestorm that it set off. Clip 4.
To fully understand the fallout from this tweet, you need to really know what basketball means to the folks here in China. The NBA and basketball are something that have gathered a lot of fans here, millions of fans, in fact. So not only are people watching it on TV, but they're also coming together at times like this, young people, and playing on neighborhood courts like the one behind me. Let's recap what exactly played out over the past couple of days and where we are today. It started on Friday with the general manager of the Houston Rockets posting a photo that said, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." That, of course, a reference to the democracy protests that are going on right now in Hong Kong and have been happening there for 18 plus weeks. He subsequently took down that tweet, deleted it, realizing that the backlash was coming quite quickly. That backlash included Chinese Basketball Association severing ties with the Rockets, the major broadcaster CCTV here, likewise terminating a contract to show some of the games here, and big sponsors like Tencent saying that they would suspend live streaming any of the Rockets games. So a lot of money's at stake and a lot of eyes here that would likewise be watching the Rockets as they play. Now, Maury sent out a subsequent tweet, and I'll read that for you, apologizing for what he initially put out. He said, quote, "I did not intend my tweet to cause any offense to Rockets fans and friends of mine in China. I was merely voicing one thought based on one interpretation of one complicated event. I have had a lot of opportunities since that tweet to hear and consider other perspectives. I have always appreciated the significant support of our Chinese fans and sponsors have provided, and I would hope that those who are upset will know that offending or misunderstanding them was not my intention. My tweets are my own and in no way represent the Rockets or the NBA."
That's a story put out by CNN International summarizing the backlash, as it said there, since this tweet on Friday. Daryl Morey having come out to apologize. The Rockets, well, the star player James Harden yesterday, he said, "We apologize. You know, we love China. We love playing there." He said, "For both of us individually," I think he was standing next to Russell Westbrook. He says, "For both of us individually, we go there once or twice a year. They show us the most important love. And then the NBA distributed its response to Maury's tweet, this 6 or 7 word tweet. The NBA said, "We recognize that the views expressed by the Houston Rockets general manager, Daryl Morey, have deeply offended many of our friends and fans in China, which is regrettable. While Daryl has made it clear that his tweet does not represent the Rockets or the NBA, the values of the league support individuals educating themselves and sharing their views on matters important to them." So that's NBA, the NBA walking the fine line. But I thought this comment from ESPN, of course, is radically to the left, and maybe they've tried to straighten it out a little bit after so many controversies in years past. But this is a left-wing organization, ESPN, and it says at the website, "The incident has proven to come at a particularly awkward moment for the league, whose players have often been outspoken on social issues in the United States." So when it's the U.S., if it's Donald Trump or the White House or Republicans, they will speak out. In some cases, they'll speak out or protest the U.S. flag. Now, that's more common and prevalent, I guess, in the NFL and some other sports. But still, they've boycotted the White House, some of them. Quite a few of them, in fact, especially over the past couple of years. But as soon as these are social justice warriors, so many of them. But as soon as the authoritarian state of China is upset, you see them begin to backtrack in a hurry. Pretty interesting development. One little tweet on Friday. And now everyone has to come out and give a hearty endorsement to China, the authoritarian state, and throw Hong Kong under the bus. What do we have at thetrumpet.com today? Hong Kong endures worst day of violence. And you have all of these Chinese troops and policemen moving into Hong Kong. The Spectator said a few days ago, there's been a tragic escalation of tensions, and Hong Kong has become a tinderbox. The explosion of anger today should be condemned, but it is the result of the brutal actions of the authorities to what were initially peaceful protests. It's particularly worrying to see credible reports that China has doubled the number of troops in Hong Kong to 12,000. So here's China, this communist state, sending more troops into Hong Kong, effectively taking over Hong Kong. That's what's in the works. That's what's happening. Creeping authoritarianism. It's like we say at thetrumpet.com. It was prophesied. My father wrote in 2016. Again, I brought this out when we were passing that anniversary from a week or two ago. This is from 2016, the Trumpet. China is intimidating the nations of Southeast Asia into submission to its will. It's forcing these countries to do what it wants. It says everything is headed in the direction of war. But as we saw over the weekend, if you're in the NBA and if you're making millions and millions of dollars from the Chinese market, you can't criticize them. Or if you do, you have to immediately apologize. Sean Davis had a piece at The Federalist, shifting gears here for a moment, about the testimony from this Ukraine envoy, Kurt Volker. I think it was last Thursday. And I believe the testimony, it came out either Thursday night or Friday. And the media, they were hard at work over the weekend trying to pull out any language from this testimony that would suggest that Donald Trump is someone who should be impeached over what he's done in Ukraine, over the so-called quid pro quo. What's interesting to me is, again, it's the same story as we brought out with respect to the transcript, the phone conversation between President Trump and the Ukrainian president, how that they just would pick and choose and in some cases skip over 500 words to make that transcript say something that it clearly did not say. And it's the same with the Volker testimony. This is from Sean Davis. It says, congressional testimony from the former top American envoy to Ukraine directly contradicts the impeachment narrative offered by congressional Democrats and their allies. So if you read through the entirety of the transcript, you see how that it contradicts what Democrats are out there saying. Davis says, Ambassador Kurt Volker, who served 2 years as top U.S. diplomatic envoy in Ukraine, testified on Thursday that he was never aware of and never took part in any effort to push the Ukrainian government to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden or his son, Hunter. It says he also stressed, this is, again, according to Davis, responding or commenting on Volker's testimony, he also stressed that the interactions between Giuliani, that's the lawyer for President Trump, any interactions between Giuliani and Ukrainian officials were facilitated not to find dirt on Biden, but to assuage concerns that the incoming Ukrainian government would not be able to get a handle on corruption within the country. Further on, this article says, Volker vehemently denied that he ever urged the Ukrainian government to dig up dirt on the Biden family. It says, as you will see from the extensive text messages I'm providing, which convey a sense of real-time dialogue with several different actors, Vice President Biden was never a topic of discussion. And yet, over the weekend, the New York Times, I think it was on Saturday, they sifted through all these text messages. And again, they try to put together a narrative saying that there's all kinds of Trump corruption in Ukraine, when in fact, the more and more they cover this story, the more corruption is being turned up regarding the Democrats, the 2016 election, and of course the Biden family. Just to finish off here with Sean Davis, it says Volker testified that he never mentioned a delay on U.S. military assistance to Ukrainian officials until late August. The phone conversation, by the way, was in July, the conversation between President Trump and the new Ukrainian president. But he says, or he testified, that he never even mentioned a delay on U.S. military assistance to Ukrainian officials until late August, when news reports indicated that funding had been put on hold. Volker's statement directly undercuts claims that the funding was part of a quid pro quo meant to force Ukrainians to take certain actions in order for military aids to be released. In fact, as we've been covering, the real quid pro quo was the one that happened in the spring of 2016 when Vice President Biden went over to Ukraine and told the Ukraine authorities, if you don't fire this prosecutor who's investigating my son's company, then you don't get $1 billion of funding. That actually happened. No one disputes that because Biden himself bragged about it. And yet the media, the Democrats' allies, they're not interested in looking into that. There was an article over the weekend. Actually, no, this is from August. This was in Politico. Before this scandal, the latest scandal that the media have tried to piece together, this false, fake narrative, there was an article back in August of 2019, so this is a couple of months ago, titled Biden Inc., and just the subhead here, from Politico, this is not a right-wing organization, but it says, over his decades in office, middle-class Joe's family fortunes have closely tracked his political career. So as his political career, and he has sold himself in campaigns. He's run for president twice. Well, maybe this is his third time. But he's sold himself as middle-class Joe. But as this article brings out here, this is a family that's come upon millions and millions of dollars over the course of his political career. this just a little bit of this Politico piece. I have to hit the high spots. It's a pretty lengthy article, but it says after the firing, I'm picking it up in the middle of a point here. It says the two large men escorted the fund's president out of the firm's Midtown Manhattan office, and James Biden laid out his vision for the fund's future. This is not Burisma, but another company, a U.S. company. Evidently, he said, "Don't worry about the investors." This is according to an executive that heard the exchange, and he's speaking on the condition of anonymity. It says, "We've got people all around the world who want to invest in Joe Biden." That's what one of the sons said about this company that they were setting up, saying that it's going to be no problem getting investors. It's going to be no problem getting contributions because of who my father is, because of who Joe Biden is. Further on, it says Biden's image as a straight-shooting man of the people, however, is clouded by the careers of his son and brother, who have lengthy track records of making or seeking deals that cash in on his name. They have a lengthy track record of this. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's illegal what's happening, but you would think there would be more curiosity. Here they've come upon millions of dollars. And now the president has come forward and said, look, there's corruption there. And everybody knows it. And as I played last week, he's waving his finger at the press saying, you all know it, but you won't look into it. You turn a blind eye to it. It says here in this Politico piece, again, this is from August, interviews, court records, government filings, and news reports, however, reveal that some members of the Biden family have consistently mixed business and politics over nearly half a century, moving from one business to the next as Joe's stature in Washington grew. One business to the next, just like Burisma. And you have Vice President Biden. By then, Vice President Biden, President Obama hands over the entirety of Ukraine and its issues to Vice President Biden. He's running the show in 2016. And he goes over there, and there's a Ukrainian prosecutor who's looking into the Biden family, Hunter Biden, Burisma, all of these millions and millions of dollars. He's investigating it. He's about to interview Hunter Biden. And Vice President Biden in 2016, the last year of the Obama administration, he goes over there and threatens them, saying, you better fire this prosecutor. A U.S. vice president telling another sovereign state, if you don't fire this prosecutor, then we're not going to give you $1 billion in funding. I should have brought the clip again. Vice President Biden, just last year, bragging about that. He bragged about it on video. It's there for all to see. So the president, in July, he has this conversation with the new Ukrainian president, and he mentions Joe Biden in passing and all of this corruption. And he says, in passing, you ought to look into that. And that's why the president, evidently, that's why the president is supposed to be impeached for that comment. Listen to what President Trump said on Friday with respect to the Biden family and why he has an obligation, why his Department of Justice has an obligation to at least look into it. This is clip one.
Everything to me is about corruption. We want to find out what happened with 2016. And as you know, there's a lot of work going on in that. I don't care about Biden's campaign, but I do care about corruption. His campaign, that's up to him. Politics, that's up to them. I don't care about politics. Politics, as I think I made clear, and yesterday somebody asked me a question, and I gave an answer, but always in the form of corruption. What I want to do, and I think I have an obligation to do it, probably a duty to do it, corruption. We are looking for corruption. When you look at what Biden and his son did, and when you look at other people, what they've done, and I believe there was tremendous corruption with Biden, but I think there was beyond corruption, having to do with the 2016 campaign. and what these lowlifes did to so many people, to hurt so many people in the Trump campaign, which was successful despite all of the fighting us. I mean, despite all of the unfairness. So we are looking at corruption. We're not looking at politics. We're looking at corruption.
President Trump on Friday saying that we're looking at corruption here. And it's not just the Bidens. There's other people, too. This goes on all over the world, in fact. And it's not just Democrats who are getting handouts from big donors overseas because of their famous relatives or their powerful relatives who work in Washington. Democrats and Republicans alike, and you can see why the president's facing so much resistance on this. There's a lot of politicians who hate the fact that he's investigating this kind of corruption. And of course, there's a lot of people, a lot of Obama holdovers in the intelligence community that hate the fact that the investigators are being investigated. So he's just being attacked from all sides. This is what John Brennan, I think he said this over the weekend. He's the former CIA director, the one that was out there publicizing, doing everything that he could to publicize the Steele dossier, relying on Russian informants, relying on British investigators, using every nation that he could to try to bring down the Trump administration, to try to bring down the Trump campaign. All of these foreign sources. And yet here he is now. He's being investigated. And so he's taking to CNN or MSNBC, whoever he works for, as regularly as he can to try to take shots at the President of the United States. This is clip 2.
How would the CIA assess the stability of the American government right now? Oh, well, if it were assessing America as if it was another country?
We would look at it as a very corrupt government that is under the sway right now of this powerful individual who has been able to just corrupt the institutions and the laws of that country.
What would you say about the stability of the democracy?
I think it's no longer, a democracy if an autocrat has it in his hands. And people like Johnson and others are putty in his hands, which means that the democratic principles upon which this country are founded are eroding right now.
So the CIA would not assess America as a stable democracy?
I think given the polarization of the country as well, there's just tremendous political instability here, and which is consuming the government now, and it's not able to take care of the issues that it needs to address, whether it be on the domestic front or the national security or the foreign policy front. So yes, I think there's a real question about the stability.
That's the former CIA director saying that America is no longer a democracy. That's the former CIA director who voted for the Communist Party in 1976. And he's saying Donald Trump won an election in 2016. And this is what they reject. Hillary Clinton was out there over the weekend saying it over and over again. He's illegitimate. He's an illegitimate president. They will not accept the results of that democratic election. And now they're calling into question the American democracy itself. Forget about the millions and millions of people who voted for Donald Trump. Forget about all of that support. Now, and of course, Chuck Todd there is just egging him on. He's just lost it in these last several days. Screaming at politicians, screaming at Republicans, this commentator. They are furious. And they're all in on the conspiracy to try to bring down a duly elected presidency. There was a piece at the American Thinker. John Brennan hears Barr's chilling footsteps. They're getting worried. James Clapper, this article says, back in, April, I guess it was, when he heard the Attorney General, William Barr, testify that Donald Trump's administration had been spied upon, Clapper said he thought that was stunning and scary for an AG to say that. They won't even admit that they spied on Trump. To even suggest it. Certainly when it comes from the Attorney General, that's scary. Well, they're scared. They're running scared. Because this attempted coup, it's being exposed. It says at the American Thinker, Brennan may be hearing those footsteps get louder as well with his increasingly hysterical commentaries at MSNBC, which, along with CNN, is where liars and leakers go to die, warning President Trump to keep off the grass. Warning the president. They're all trying to get the attention put upon President Trump because they fear exposure. Let me remind you of what Chuck Schumer said before President Trump was even inaugurated. When the president was coming in, President-elect Trump was coming in, he criticized the intel community because it was starting to be revealed what was actually going on there in 2016. And President-elect Trump was critical. And then here's what Chuck Schumer had to say about even criticizing the U.S. intelligence community. This is clip 5.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
If you take on the intelligence community, they're going to get back at you. And that's what we're seeing happen with the whistleblower. Now there's a second one who's also offended by what President Trump said in that conversation. They're all working together. They're in collusion. Democrats, radical leftists in collusion, working in collusion with the news media. Rush Limbaugh mentioned last week on his show, I think it was a Monday show, that John Brennan, this is the CIA director under Obama, worked there for 4 years. He mentioned on one of his shows, Limbaugh did, that Brennan took a trip to Ukraine in 2016 using a fake passport to dig up dirt on Donald Trump. And after that comment from Rush Limbaugh, as I think a lot of people know, he has 10 or 20 million people listening to him through the week. But you try to find some news coverage of John Brennan and the fake passport. If you do a Google search on it, you're just going to get a lot of links to Rush Limbaugh. That's it. A fake passport to dig up dirt on a political opponent? That's fine. That's fine. As long as you're aiming your wrath, as long as you're seeking after a Republican. Why isn't there more reporting on something as explosive as that? It's just ignored. Well, there's one more piece here from the New York Times. This is over the weekend about the Never Trump coalition and how that so many of them, there's still a few holdouts, but he's won quite a few of them over, the president, building a coalition ahead of his reelection campaign next year. And then, of course, as we've said from the beginning, he has the enthusiastic support of the evangelical community, the religious community. This is something that the president, again, said over the weekend, clip 3.
I got a call the other night from pastors, the biggest pastors, evangelical Christians. They said, we have never seen our religion or any religion so electrified. They say they've never seen anything like it. Churches are joining, hundreds of thousands of people.
It's the president on the weekend talking about Jeroboam's religion. And he went on to say in that clip that you members of the media, you're responsible for this revival. In a lot of ways, you're responsible. Well, as I say, there's a lot of prophecies at play here, some fascinating developments. Amos 7, of course, springs to mind, and a lot to keep our eyes on ahead of what will surely be a crazy year of news coverage here in the United States. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily radio show. If you'd like to email the program, you can send comments to td@kpcg.fm. We'll be right back.
This is KPCG-FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Could anything be more mysterious than the question of the unseen spirit world? Angelic beings have always been a mystery to people on the earth. Do angels actually exist? Is there, in fact, a Satan, the devil? Is Satan a literal, immortal being? Did God create a devil? To understand more about the mystery of angels and evil spirits, be sure to request Herbert W. Armstrong's masterful work, Mystery of the Ages. To learn more, please visit thetrumpet.com. The Trumpet Daily.
The night before he was crucified, Jesus Christ told his disciples, he said, "By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another." By this, he said, by God's love dwelling in these disciples, by God's love flowing out from their lives in the form of good works toward others, this is how mankind would know who are the disciples of Christ. This would be the sign. God's love. In Matthew 22, verses 36 through 38, it says, "Master, which is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus said unto him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment." We've talked in recent programs about God's holy law, God's just and perfect and righteous law. Well, God's law, the Bible says, is love. That's what his law is. The 10 Commandments of God, they are love. They're all a reflection of godly love. Verse 39, in this same passage in Matthew, it says, "And the second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So this is the way of life, God's way of life. This is his lifestyle. He's unselfish. He's outflowing in his love for others. In The Incredible Human Potential, Herbert Armstrong writes, "God's law, the basis of God's government, is the way of love, outgoing concern for the good and welfare of others, love toward God in obedience, humility, and worship, the way of giving, sharing, helping, and cooperating." So this is the law that God set in motion to govern all of our thoughts and actions. As I say, it's an expression of his character, his nature, his way of life. And this is the law, let's be honest, this is the law that the world hates, that many in the religious world of Christianity say is done away. They don't want this law. God's law of love. That's really what they're saying. Matthew 23, Jesus, as you know, throughout his ministry, he exposed the rank hypocrisy that was on display daily among Pharisees and Sadducees. Verse 1 of Matthew 23 says, Then spoke Jesus to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you, observe, that observe and do. But do not you after their works, for they say, and do not. They were hypocrites. They were smooth talkers. They knew exactly what to say. So much so that Jesus said, do as they say. Just don't do as they do, because they don't practice what they preach. They don't live it. They're just concerned about the outward appearance. But conversion, true conversion, as we know, involves much more than just what it looks like on the outside. It's the inside that counts. It involves a deep personal relationship with God, a deep love for God and his family. Verse 23 of Matthew 23, it says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith," it says. "These ought you to have done, and not to leave the other undone." They were concerned about the smaller points, self-righteously concerned about the smaller points. And of course, Christ says you ought to not leave those undone. But what about the weightier matters? Verse 25 says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within are full of extortion and excess." So here again, Christ is exposing their hypocrisy, saying that they were concerned only about the appearance. Back in 1992, Joe DeKoch keyed in on this passage. Actually, he twisted it, its meaning. He twisted it. He perverted it. It was fake teachings, fake instructions. He said this, and this is again when the church is veering off course, when many of God's people were becoming lukewarm. He said in 1992, "Christians should consider that the Ten Commandments do not require kindness, mercy, compassion, generosity, sacrifice for others, impartiality, patience, or love," he said. The Ten Commandments don't require love. He says, "Nor do the Ten Commandments specifically forbid conceit, envy, hatred, rage, or selfish ambition." None of that's true. He just made it up. And a lot of people, sadly, just went right along with it. Coming back to this passage in Matthew 23, it says in verse 27, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you're like whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones, and of all uncleanness." It says, "Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within you are full of hypocrisy and iniquity." Christ is teaching here that we've got to be clean from the inside out. We've got to be clean. Going back to this letter from 1992, Mr. DeKoch said that the Ten Commandments are important, but they're not enough. And then he paraphrases what's written here in verses 27 and 28, I think verse 27 specifically. But he says, Jesus warned the Pharisees, who were strict legalists, "Woe unto you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites." So the King James Version says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." And Mr. DeKoch says that passage says, "Woe unto you, teachers of the law." He wanted to put that in there. My father says the better Bible translations do not say, "Woe to you, teachers of the law." The better translations make no mention of the word law. You can find the word law in some paraphrased versions of the Bible and a few incorrect translations who added the word law because they thought it fit the context. But as my father has brought out before, it's because they hate God's law. So they want to insert that into the passage, into Matthew 23. And, of course, at that time, Mr. DeKoch, he loved that. He loved that sort of paraphrase of Matthew 23:27. Because, well, if you can put law in there, you can say that Christ was really against law keepers. What Christ is condemning here in Matthew 23 is self-righteous hypocrisy. Those who weren't obeying the weightiest matters of the law. He was giving a full endorsement, a hearty endorsement of God's law of love. Even with some of the finer points. He said, don't leave those undone, but look, your focus is off. Satan sure is subtle. You look at how he was working in the late 1980s and the 1990s to deceive tens of thousands of God's people. He really went after the law of God. He attacked the law of God. And that's because the devil is lawless. He hates God's law of love. He hates God. And so he's on the attack nonstop. We've talked before even about the spirit behind this attack on the U.S. Constitution, on U.S. institutions, founding institutions. The attack even on the presidency. There's a lawless spirit behind it all. And that always comes from the devil. Luke 11. Here's another encounter that Jesus had with Pharisees. In Luke 11 and verse 37, it says, and as he spoke, a certain Pharisee besought him to dine with him, and he went in and he sat down to meat. And when the Pharisee saw it, he marveled that he had not first washed before dinner. So here's a Pharisee marveling at just how physically filthy he thought Jesus was. Verse 39, and the Eternal said unto him, now do you Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but your inward part is full of ravening and wickedness. You fools, did not he that made that which is without make that which is within also? Here again, he says, what about the heart? What about what's going on the inside? What about your evil nature? Let's talk about that for a moment. Verse 42, it says, but woe unto you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs, it says, and pass over judgment and the love of God. You pass right over God's judgment and his love. It says in verse 42, these ought you to have done, and not to leave the other undone. So similar to what it says in Matthew 23. But here, notice, here they were out there carefully measuring every little seed with respect to tithing, for example. Again, don't leave that undone, Jesus said. It's not that I'm saying don't tithe, but they were overlooking judgment and the love of God. They were overlooking godly love. 1 Corinthians 13 is often referred to as the love chapter, a wonderful study, verses 4 through 8 in particular. A detailed definition of godly love. Let's start in verse 1, though. It says, in the Moffat translation, I may speak with the tongues of men, or in many different languages, the tongues of men and of angels, but if I have no love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. The King James Version uses the word charity for love there, but really love, even though the world has a twisted and distorted understanding of what love is. They confuse it with lust in most cases, certainly in Hollywood movies and music and that sort of thing. But love, if you understand God's definition of it, love is the right word there. Agape love, that's God's love. Godly love, this is how Mr. Armstrong defined it, an unselfish, outgoing concern for the good and welfare of the one loved. He said love is primarily on the giving, serving, sharing side of the fence, not on the getting, taking, factional, striving side. He said love is not selfish. That's Mr. Armstrong's definition. That's how he defined the love of God. Here in 1 Corinthians 13, Paul says, and this is from the Moffat translation, Paul says in verse 4, love is very patient, very kind. Love knows no jealousy. He says love makes no parade, gives itself no airs, is never rude, never selfish, never irritated, never resentful. Love is never glad when others go wrong. Love is gladdened by goodness, always slow to expose, always eager to believe the best, always hopeful, always patient. Love never disappears. This is the kind of love that would solve all the problems of this world. Never mind what Joe DeKoch was saying back in 1992. Well, the commandments are nice, but they're not really good enough. And then they carried on with that line of thinking to just talk about this mushy kind of love. Human love, shallow love, carnal love, a worldly love, the world's definition of love. Here is God's definition in 1 Corinthians 13. Verse 13 says, and now abide faith, hope, charity, or godly love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. All three of these godly qualities or characteristics. This is what brings God's family together. This is what unifies God's family. And of these three, love is paramount. Love is the weightiest matter of the whole law because God is love. That's in 1 John 4. This is what God's love is. His law. This is what God is. Unselfish, outflowing concern for the good and welfare of others. So given these passages and what we're reading right here in 1 Corinthians 13, you can see why the Apostle John in 1 John 5 and verse 3 said that this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not grievous. This is God's love. Obedience to his commandments. That is the expression of God's love. That's what God expects for those of us in his church. He wants us to be knit together or unified by this most weighty matter of the law, the love of God. And Jesus said in Matthew 22, as we read, that this is the first and most important law of all, loving God, which includes his family, putting God and his family first in your life, even ahead of your own desires and interests. Now that's an incredibly high standard to abide by. It's a royal standard. But we have in our Heavenly Father and in his Son Jesus Christ, we have perfect examples to look to. Look at this plan they've laid out for not just those of us in the church, but for all of mankind. Look at the sacrifice that was made so that we might be reconciled to our Father in heaven. Look at the love that will soon spread over all the earth as we gear up for, and many of us, as we gear up for the Feast of Tabernacles, just a week away. Of course, we don't want to forget about atonement, on Wednesday this week. But as we gear up for the Feast of Tabernacles, this is something certainly to think about, coming together in unity and in love for one another, going to the feast to worship God, going to the feast, first and foremost, to put God and His family first. It's not about us. It's not about an excursion we might have before or after the feast. We're off to the feast to put God and the family of God, first in our lives, ahead of even our own desires and interests, because of just how much we love God and His purpose, His family. My father, in a message that he gave a few weeks ago, maybe it was a couple of months ago now, but he asked us, what does it take to unite us? And he says, if we're not united, something is wrong. He said, we must be one or we're in danger spiritually. If you look at the great tragedy of our day, this last and final era of God's church, it's noted for its division and strife. A great falling away from the truth, a great falling away from the law of God. The love of God, Matthew 24, the love of God waxing cold in God's own family, in God's own church. As God's people, we're known by His family name. We're known by His royal law. As Jesus said to His disciples the night before He was crucified, by this will all people know that you're my disciples, if, He says, if you love one another, if you have this love of God. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily radio show. If you'd like to email the program, you can send feedback to td@kpcg.fm. Also, don't forget that at the trumpet.com website, over at the Trumpet Daily radio show page on the website, you can submit audio feedback if you'd like to record a message. There's a nice big bright red button that you can push to submit some feedback in audio format, and hopefully at a later time we can play some of that feedback for the rest of you. We thank you for joining us on today's program, and we'll see you again tomorrow.